Jennifer was a smart girl from childhood. From the first day of school, she was the best student. Her parents were happy. They were simple farmers who had a daughter who was an excellent student. Most of all, Jennifer liked physics, chemistry, and biology. Many people thought that after school, she would go to medical school, but she surprised everyone by going to the University of Technology. Although her relatives were not particularly surprised, they all still remembered and laughed about how Jennifer was interested in all sorts of devices, even before school. Once she took apart her father's old tape recorder and was interested in how it worked. Later, Jennifer watched attentively as her father fixed the motorcycle and repaired the sockets in the house. "Why weren't you born a boy?" Her father smiled. "Why don't you go play with dolls?" But Jennifer stubbornly shook her head and went to assemble robots, cars, and planes out of Lego. At the age of 10, Jennifer had taught her neighbor, Mr. Davis, how to stop drinking. The man was already retired and was a heavy drinker. Sometimes he would get drunk and go on a rampage in the whole village. One evening, when Mr. Davis's weeping wife was cursing helplessly at her good-for-nothing husband, Jennifer quietly went out into the street and headed for a neighbor's house. Nobody even noticed her leaving, except her mother, who saw her daughter doing something on the neighbor's porch. After that, the girl hid behind the house, and after about 5 minutes, Mr. Davis showed up. The man stepped on the threshold and froze. He heard a sound similar to an automatic rifle. The old man got scared, sobered up right away, fell on the ground, and covered his head with his hands. Then he crawled back inside the house. The next times it was all repeated. When he was sober, everything was all right. As soon as he got drunk, he started to hear an automatic shot. The old man was afraid of going crazy, so he began to drink less often and soon stopped altogether. Everybody in the village praised him and Jennifer's parents laughed. The girl invented a new way to get rid of alcohol addiction. In fact, she had placed a speaker under the porch and would turn it on every time the man came home drunk. That was her secret. Simple but effective. At the age of 14, Jennifer came up with another idea. Someone had been stealing pears and apples from their garden at night. Her father even spent a night in the field hoping to catch the thief, but to no avail. Then Jennifer thought of a way to catch the culprit. In the evening, she sprayed the bushes and trees with a special paint that couldn't be washed off. She hoped that if the thief returned to the garden, their hands would be stained with the same color, making them easier to identify. And it worked. Her father discovered that the pears were missing again from several trees. He decided to walk around the village and listen to what people were saying. Soon, he found out that the school bus driver was the one robbing their garden at night. He would have never suspected her. Jennifer's father saw the woman hanging up her wet t-shirt and swearing. "How do I get this paint out?" he heard her say. He approached and saw that the t-shirt was covered in burgundy stains. His daughter had sprinkled the same color on the trees. "When did your husband get so dirty?" he asked the woman, who shuddered and changed her expression. "He was fixing the car, so it got all over him," she mumbled. At that moment, her husband came out of the house and immediately put his hands in his pockets. But there was paint even on his elbows. "I see now who's been stealing my fruit," Jennifer's father said with a sullen nod. "Tell me, what do you lack? If it had been some alcoholic, I would understand. But you have a good life." "I won't do it again," said the thief. "Just don't tell the police." And from then on, no one stole fruit from their garden at night. "You sure know how to think outside the box, Jennifer," her parents laughed. When Jennifer was in 9th grade, her father encountered some trouble. He injured his right arm while working with a saw in the woods. The doctors had to amputate his hand. He was worried about how he would live and work. But soon he was given a prosthesis, although it was uncomfortable. "Don't worry, Daddy," Jennifer reassured him. "Nowadays they make such cool prostheses. They call them bionic ones. They have special electronics built in. A person with such a prosthesis can do everything as if with a normal hand." "Daughter, I've heard of them," nodded her father, "but they're very expensive. When I grow up and go to university, I'll invent a cheaper model," declared Jennifer in an unapologetic tone. And indeed, she entered the university where students were engaged in the study and development of various devices, including those for the rehabilitation of people with disabilities. Jennifer studied with pleasure and enthusiasm. She wanted to know everything. Soon, she and the other students began to take additional classes in the laboratory. Jennifer began to work on the artificial smart hand. She searched for ways to make it both cheaper and more functional. There was one disadvantage. This laboratory was located at the other end of the city, away from the dormitory where Jennifer lived. Twice a week after classes, Jennifer would drive there and stay up late, barely catching the last bus. That evening, she and the other students were too enthusiastic about their work. When Jennifer realized that she was going to miss the bus, she quickly said goodbye to the guys and headed for the exit. "Jennifer, where did you put the hand?" The guys shouted after her cheerfully when they saw that she had put the prosthetic hand in her bag. "I promised to tell about my work tomorrow at the university," Jennifer explained, "and the professor said I could take it with me." "Yes, yes," replied the professor, looking away from another paper. "Take it, Jennifer, but be careful with it." "Yeah, be careful," laughed the students. "Don't scare anybody on the way." "I'll try," smiled Jennifer and ran for the bus. But she didn't catch it in time. The last bus closed its doors and took off abruptly when the girl had just run up to the bus stop. "Stop! Stop!" shouted Jennifer with despair. But the driver was unkind that day. He saw that the girl was running as fast as she could, but he didn't stop anyway. Jennifer looked at the disappearing lights of the bus and cried. What should she do now? As luck would have it, her phone was out of charge. There was some change in her pocket, but no one would take her to another part of the city for that money. Jennifer sat down on the bench at the bus stop, pulled on a mask so that no one could see her tears. Would she really have to spend the night here? Maybe go back to the lab, she thought. Yeah, that would probably be best. Eventually, she could borrow money from the guys and then give it back. Jennifer sighed in relief, but just as she was about to get up from the bench, a cab pulled up next to her. "Hi," the driver asked cheerfully. "Did you miss the last bus? Let me give you a ride." "Thank you, but I don't have any money," replied Jennifer, "so I'll give you a ride without money." The driver, a young man, smiled friendly. "Are you a student? I used to be one too. I know that sometimes money is tight. Get in, don't be afraid. I'm going that way." And Jennifer, who had been told since childhood not to get into cars with strangers, agreed. She must have been confused, and the man seemed decent. The driver opened the door in the front, seeing that Jennifer headed back. "Don't be afraid. I'm normal. I'm not a maniac, and you can take your mask off if you'd like." "And I'm not afraid." "I'm more comfortable with a mask," replied Jennifer, although deep in her heart, she began to worry. The cab driver confidently drove the car. The music was playing in the car, and Jennifer carefully watched the road. It seemed like he was driving right, and suddenly, not reaching a couple of kilometers to the dormitory, the driver turned into a blind alley. "Well, come on, pay up, and then I'll take you to the door," he said, and turned off the engine. The locks on the doors clicked. "You said free of charge," confused Jennifer. "Why, you are like a little girl. Without money doesn't mean free," grinned the driver. "Well, go ahead, make me happy." And he reached for his fly. Jennifer huddled in her chair in horror. What trouble she was in. And then common sense told her, "Jennifer, don't panic. There is a way out of every situation." Her gaze fell on the package she was clutching to her. "Well, what are you waiting for, baby?" the driver asked. And suddenly Jennifer remembered how she had cured Mr. Davis of alcoholism. "1 minute," she answered quietly. "Just close your eyes. I'm embarrassed." "Well, okay," grinned the driver and closed his eyes. "What's he got to be afraid of?" Jennifer, meanwhile, quietly pulled out her prosthesis and squeezed it tightly in her hand. "What are you waiting for?" asked the driver again. "I'm already starting," replied Jennifer in a trembling voice, and reached for the cab driver with her prosthetic hand. The cab driver laughed and squeezed his eyes shut in anticipation, and the next second he shuddered and opened his eyes in horror. He felt that something solid and cold had touched his body. He looked down and saw something that looked like a hand, but it was bony, as if a skeleton had touched him. The cab driver turned his gaze to Jennifer's face and froze with fear. The mask slid down. She opened her mouth slightly. Go Go away! The driver literally shrieked and jumped out of the car. Jennifer watched in slight bewilderment as he ran away. Of course, she had counted on such a scenario, but she did not expect that it would have such a dramatic effect. She didn't hesitate and jumped out of the car too. She knew that the dormitory was just around the corner. Jennifer ran through the dark streets, clutching her prosthesis, and could still not understand why rare passers-by looked at her strangely, and one woman gasped and crossed herself. The roommate was already asleep when Jennifer finally came into the room. "Jennifer, why are you so late?" grumbled Shelley. "I decided to go to bed early. Don't turn on the light." "Okay," whispered Jennifer. "Oh, what's that in your teeth?" cried Shelley, seeing that Jennifer's teeth were glowing in the dark. And only then did Jennifer realize what had made such an effect on the cab driver and on passers-by. The fact was that in the lab, she and the other students had fooled around a bit. On one of the websites, Jennifer had bought special plates that, when put in your mouth, glow in the dark. Later, Jennifer got so caught up in her work that she forgot to take them off. Then the girl was upset about being late for the bus that she did not even feel there was something on her gums. Realizing what the matter was, Jennifer told her friend about her evening adventures. The girls couldn't sleep for half the night in the room and couldn't stop laughing. I'm sure he'll be telling his friends now that he saw a monster or thought he was going to die. And the girls burst into laughter again. Jennifer was smiling, even though, to be honest, she was terrified at first. But she couldn't imagine how scared the driver must have been, who decided to relax a little that night with a silly, as he thought, passenger. Harvey had been working as a cab driver for several years, but he had one weakness. He cheated on his wife. And at that stop, he would often encounter female students who were late for the last bus. No, he didn't force anyone to do anything. Most of the time, they agreed almost immediately to his terms. Although if they started arguing, he would just open the doors and that was it. This time, everything seemed to be going fine, and then suddenly he opened his eyes and saw something that looked like death in front of his face. And a bony hand was touching him. Harvey ran away, but then he remembered that he had left the car with the documents and cash and ran back. It must have been a setup. They must have stolen my car, he thought. He had already forgotten what he wanted to do just a few minutes before, and now considered himself a victim. But to his surprise, the car was still there, and even the money in the glove compartment was still intact. Was it all just a dream? Harvey wondered, but from that night on, strange changes began to happen to him. First, he stopped looking at other women. Soon he realized that driving a taxi was not his thing. He was shaking with fear when he had to drive lonely young girls because he immediately remembered the passenger with the green mouth. Harvey quit his job as a cab driver and got a job as a security guard. And one day, he saw those same glowing teeth on the internet. He realized he had been fooled by the girl, but he didn't return to driving a cab. It was somehow safer to work as a security guard. And thanks to this incident, his wife became the one and only for him. Several months passed, and Jennifer was no longer late for the bus. By the end of the year, together with her teacher, they had managed to come up with a simple but fairly effective model of a bionic prosthesis. Jennifer really hoped that one day her father would be able to try on such a clever arm. About a year later, a company was interested in the invention and allocated money, and the experimental sample was presented to Jennifer's father. "What a dreadful thing," said her father. "Such a hand is only for scaring thieves." "You can do a lot with such a hand," Jennifer smiled slyly. She did not tell her parents about her adventure, but that story had taught her a lot. Now she never gets into a car with a stranger, but just in case, she always has pepper spray with her. It's more reliable because not all drivers are as impressionable as Harvey.